it does seem like George Floyd's killing before our eyes really just stripped bare any illusions that many people had.
You want to know what my wife and I got in an argument about the other day? I had this older car, had to get a new car, and I was like, you know what? We should tint the windows, just a really, really light tint. And my wife's like, no, we shouldn't. Not right now. It doesn't matter what I say on TV or how much notoriety I get for what I say. At the end of the day, like, I've been pulled over multiple times in my life for driving a suspicious vehicle. A suspicious vehicle. And they've been nice vehicles, but suspicious.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well. It's been a really hard time throughout the country, and we're going to be talking to someone now who will, I think, have a lot of insight to share. He's ESPN broadcast commentator and former NBA player, former college basketball legend. Well, I guess he's still a legend. Jay Williams. Jay, how are you, brother?
I'm good, man. How about yourself?
Doing well. The family's good. So you were in Brooklyn until quite recently, is that right?
Yeah, a lot of people decided to get out of the city. A lot of people who are very privileged had the monetary value to get out of the city. My wife and I just chose to stay. We're there for throughout this entire pandemic, which is a little bit. It's definitely different. Being stuck in New York City with the amount of anxiety that is able to be pressed upon you every single day, just trying to get outside for a breath of fresh air. And then we had one of our balcony windows that literally just shattered, and it came down. And we got pretty scared because there's no rock or anything that came through it. We called the cops. We thought they thought it could potentially have been a BB gun. We weren't sure.
That's terrifying. You have a baby daughter in the house,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, we have a 19-month-old. And then all the protests and a lot of some of the rioting began, and our building got a little bit messed up. So it just became one of those scenarios where about this, Andrew. Like, I had to protect my family, so we partnered up with another couple, and we came up to Maine for a couple of weeks, and are just staying here and watching from afar, and waiting for things to de-escalate.
Well, I'm glad that you and your family are safe. Everyone's okay?
Everybody's good, man. We're very thankful that everybody's good. I feel like overall our country is moving in a interesting, positive direction. Seeing so many people come together, it's been really moving, man. It's just been innately different to be a part of something like this. I don't know if you feel the same way. It's just it's so cool to granted, it's complex because we're still in the midst of a pandemic, and that's a whole other issue. But it is good to see us be united to a degree.
I feel the same way. I feel like this is unprecedented in my lifetime, where so many people have come together. And there's something both tragic and beautiful about the outpouring of passion and grief and emotion that, you saw up close, since it sounds like you were literally within steps or a stone's throw away from some of these protests in Brooklyn.
Yeah, it was different. The vibe was different. At that time, obviously, there's a lot of pent up frustration and anger. And I think ultimately, coming out of that in a lot more of a peaceful way, but it's powerful. And I've had so many conversations, Andrew, and I think that the fact that this came together, I've had a lot of raw conversations with people, and you kind of are able to dive right into people being real instead of a lot of the political or social conjecture that you get with certain answers, where people haven't been as real with themselves. It's been a lot of dancing before, and now we get a chance to be raw and a little bit unfiltered. It feels rewarding to a degree.
That's so powerful. It does seem like George Floyd's killing before our eyes really just stripped bare any illusions that many people had. Like there are people who I think might have been resistant to the reality of police brutality, maybe literally like 4 weeks ago that now are completely on board with the fact that this is like a moral stain and a scourge that's been killing people of color for generations. And when I talk to people who are black men, frankly, like most of them have told me that they were like hit like a hammer by the George Floyd video where like they felt anger, grief, fear, and they said that it was like familiar emotions but amplified past anything that they'd experienced before.
It really has, man. It's so funny. I've been calling you AY for a really long time. I give people nicknames. I've been calling you AY. I don't want to be like, if that's not a nickname you go by, but I just naturally
welcome, man.
Okay.
It works for me. That's actually much better than the shit I got called as a kid. So I would have welcomed AY, as like the lone Asian kid in my town. That would have made me cool.
But that's why I wanted to talk to you, though. That's why I wanted to talk to you, AY, right? Like, it's you being the ethnicity that you are, running for president. Me being, I know you felt this. I'm curious to get your opinion on this. And I know you have questions for me and I want to ask you questions, but it's, I didn't feel comfortable speaking on so many things because I was a black man on TV, and a lot of bosses that we had, it's not as diverse. And you almost feel to a degree that if you were to take a step outside the norm of how society deems you need to communicate things, right? It stops your ascension. And when you're in the midst of this reality about, I have a wife, I have a kid, I have a mother that has gone through 2 kidney transplants, the responsibility that comes along with the work that I have to do, it's a challenging situation to be on. And how did you deal with that? Obviously, because you're catering to all people, but still at the same time, you're one of the first to do this from your position. How did you handle that?
Thank you for asking, Jay. I had a similar arc to what you're describing, really, over the year, like the 2 years I ran, where you show up and then you're trying to ascend. And in my case, it was like, well, I need to try and get noticed. But there was like this sense of seriousness I felt like I had to carry with me all the time because otherwise people would not take me very seriously. And so like I felt like I was kind of playing a role, and then there was a concern that if I went like off script, that things were going to go poorly for me in my campaign, that like the press was going to look for any reason to just fucking ignore me or whatnot. And so it was like, well, like, let's not give them those reasons.
Exactly.
And then,
which is kind of bullshit within itself, but it is what it is.
Yeah. I mean, I'm so grateful to independent voices who, like mainly podcasters or people that just use their own judgment, who said, hey, this Andrew Yang person has some really interesting ideas. And I did not feel that to the same extent. I think that's one reason why you and I wanted to talk, is that, if you have an hour to sit and talk to someone like a human being, it's just a very, very different format than if it's like you have a 5-minute cable news segment. I'm going to ask you 4 questions. Half of them are going to be antagonistic. Like you just feel like you're just going to be like, like dodging, like, like bricks thrown at you, figurative bricks, obviously. So it was difficult. And the tough part, Jay, was that like I found that if I didn't embrace my humanity on the trail in some ways, then like we were never going to have a prayer. And so I needed to actually act like myself. And it was a very hard thing to act like myself. I mean, it probably seemed like that was the natural thing for me to do from afar. But it was actually very, very difficult.
This episode of Yang Speaks is brought to you by Stamps.com. I don't know if you've ever used Stamps.com before, but it's a game changer.
Now, when you want stamps, you can go to the post office or you can just go to Stamps.com, which is what we did. And that was a home run for us.
So instead of going to the post office, trying to figure out how many stamps I need, how much they cost, waiting line, all that, you just go to Stamps.com. figure out, enter in what you got to pay, what you got to send, and you print stamps out at home. It's fantastic.
Right now, listeners to Yang Speaks get a special offer that includes a 4-week trial plus free postage and a digital scale without any long-term commitment. So if you mail lots of stuff, this is your chance. Just go to stamps.com, click on the microphone at the top of the homepage, and type in Yang. That's stamps.com, enter Yang.
So, I've gone through this a lot on my end. Obviously we're speaking in 2-3 minute sound bites. So, the sports world, which I think is a microcosm of your arena to a degree with the way media works, it's interesting. So we'll have like morning meetings, and, to give you an analogy, you'll have a guy, like Jamal Murray, who plays for Denver. He might have had a triple double that night, and Denver maybe plays the Clippers. And Kawhi maybe is doing load management and Paul George is out, so those guys don't play, right? And you're sitting there saying, wow, okay, Jamal Murray just had a triple-double. That's incredible. Like, he's done something that not a lot of people have been able to do in the NBA. But LeBron James and the Lakers will be playing somebody, and say it's a lower team, like a Memphis, or Memphis, for example, like a Phoenix, who's not in the playoffs, but they are now. And I know the next day we're leading with LeBron James. Like, we are leading with LeBron James, regardless of how crazy Jamal Murray went off. He could have scored 70. Like, we are going to lead with LeBron James. And I feel like a lot of times I would watch a lot of these debates that you were in, and I would hear your points. I would write them down. I'm like, man, this somewhat genius. Okay. I like the way he's thinking. And the next day, sure enough, it's like these political agendas were out there, knowing how these meetings go, leading with other people. I'm like, oh, this is the same thing as sports. This is interesting.
Well, you and I have both been in the media machine. Like, you see how those meetings go and then what stories get produced. And I certainly feel like my campaign definitely demonstrated that, like, some of the stories had a pre-written agenda before the actual event. And the fact that it happens in sports is probably not surprising to fans and people who watch it every day. Like I do. People, I'm a big sports fan. And when I talk to you and other Black athletes, like, one of the things that, like, I sensed is this anguish that, like, it doesn't matter how much you ascend, how wealthy or successful you are, that at the end of the day, like, when you're driving your car and you're a person of color, like, the police officer doesn't know who you are. And like there's a sense that you're still on guard.
You want to know what my wife and I got in an argument about the other day? So I was talking to one of my really good friends. His name is Matt Clawberg. And I was like, okay, like, I had this older car, had to get a new car. And I was like, what? We should tint the windows, just a really, really light tint. And my wife's like, no, we shouldn't. Not right now. And my wife's Lebanese and Italian. Okay. So I'm like, no, it's okay. Like, it'll be fine. And she's like, no, I don't feel comfortable with you doing that. And, like, those are the type of conversations that I end up having, that it doesn't matter how successful I get. It doesn't matter what I say on TV or how much notoriety I get for what I say. At the end of the day, like, I've been pulled over multiple times in my life for driving a suspicious vehicle. And they've been nice vehicles, but suspicious. And that's led to, things that my dad and I have talked about, Andrew, is, when you get pulled over, you keep both your hands on the wheel. You do not move. You try to use tonality that de-escalates situations, regardless of how the cop might try to escalate it or ask you questions or try to catch you out there. And when you go to your glove compartment to get your insurance or your registration, you keep one hand on the wheel, and you it's called a guide hand. You guide the cop with you as you're maintaining eye contact with him about where your hand is going. And I can't tell you how many times this happened to me. And I've been pulled over with other friends, and I've seen some of my other friends who are Caucasian, throw a hissy fit, and the cop is trying to call. And I'm like, wow, I don't have that same luxury. Even if I did, the anxiety I would have, because I know that's not the norm, just gives it such a different feel all the time. Yeah,
that's something that most of us can't relate to, or people that didn't grow up black in this country, and have that kind of experience. Certainly, like this time has highlighted for us all just how completely and destructively racist a lot of police behavior is. When I started digging into the facts around this, and I knew a lot from my time on the campaign trail, but the magnitude of the problem is highlighted by the fact that we don't even know precisely how big the problem is. It's like there have been multiple laws that were passed saying, hey, we should try and document how many people die as a result of encounters with police or in police custody. And we still don't actually get that information from police departments around the country. There were journalists who compiled it locally. And so to me, most Americans cannot relate to that. But if you're a person of color growing up in this country, it's just a reality that you've lived with for your entire life.
Yeah, so I didn't even know. I'm with you. It has been my reality. So I look at the situation in Minnesota, and I'm like, is that what we should require our police force to do? Be dismantled and then built from the floor up. But then, who's still policing the neighborhoods while you're dismantling the police force? I've heard a lot of people talk about we need to defund the police. Is that the answer? How would you go about it? Because obviously you have way more experience in this than I do.
Well, defund the police is just the wrong term for what people are arguing. People are arguing for scaling up resources to communities around healthcare and education and mental health resources and infrastructure and community services, and scale down the level of policing. And Minneapolis's step to defund, well, what they did was, it looks like they're going to disband the police department, which is an incredibly dramatic step. It happens almost never in the United States. But it did happen to a town that you probably know relatively well. It happened in Camden, New Jersey, because the Camden Police Department was so corrupt that they got there and eventually said, there is no saving this department. There's no turning this thing around. There was so much corruption going on that if I told you the stories from the news accounts where they were literally just passing the drugs around and showing everyone knew what was going on. And so they had to disband that police department. And then when they reconstituted it, they hired back some of the same police officers, but they had a completely different approach to policing where the policemen volunteered in communities. They had barbecues. If you're a new police officer in that department, you have to knock on every door of the places you're patrolling and just introduce yourself and say hi. Say, hey, I'm the police officer.
Actually know your neighbor?
Yes. It'd be like, I am the police officer that will be patrolling in this area. So they've done very dramatic things. Now, Camden was an unusual example, but it seems like Minneapolis is trying to do something similar. The fact that they did this, to me, is a major step. And other communities are going to look at this and say, wait, that's actually even conceivable, because most of us can't imagine a police department being disbanded, but it has happened multiple times in the U.S.
So I don't even know, all right, if that's the case, but maybe they are being a little bit dramatic, then what's an immediate solution? Obviously, I see a lot of activation around local legislation where people who's your district attorney, who's your mayor, what are some of the policies they put in place, obviously do more research on that. Is that the immediate answer, to go more grassroots and try to have more people that look and sound like minorities in government positions? Because I don't know if that's always the answer either, because I know a lot of people that are corrupted by these same situations. So what would you advise people to do currently?
This was Cornel West right after the riot, the protest began, where he said, look, we've tried black faces in high places and it has not actually changed like what's happening on the streets. And so there are a number of big changes that are being proposed that would move in the right direction. So number one is use of force rules, saying, look, no chokeholds, de-escalate, use of force, exhaust every other alternative, just change the rules and standards. And that apparently would have a very dramatic effect on fatality rates. having greater federal oversight, because the local district attorney is not going to want to pick a fight with the local police officers. Like, the local police officers are some of the most powerful people in the community, like sometimes the most powerful people. And so you need some kind of Department of Justice oversight that has made a difference in the past. Having people that you can call that are not police officers is actually very helpful. 1 out of every 4 people that get shot by a police officer is mentally ill. And if you can imagine a police officer showing up and saying, well, you're not listening to my commands, like halt or I'll shoot, and then like something tragic happens. Instead, you send in a crisis worker and a mental health worker and a medic for those situations, who don't have guns, obviously. So that would be a change. The toughest change that I think is going to be imperative is that there are these police union rules that make it so that a lot of police aren't really accountable when they do something wrong. And police unions are very, very powerful politically and otherwise, monetarily. And so changing those rules is going to be a very, very difficult process, but I think that's an enormous help. Right now, police departments get hundreds of millions of dollars worth of military gear from the Department of Defense at no charge. And studies have shown that if you get those weapons, you use them occasionally. There's actually a provision in the law that says if you don't use it in the course of a year, you have to give it back. So if you get a tank and grenade launchers, you literally are like, all right, I guess I have this stuff. And so every once in a while, you end up using it in communities in a way that leads to loss of life. So these are some of the things that people are trying to take aim at. The biggest one is just tracking bad cops, because right now, if you have a bad cop, they can literally quit, go 2 counties over, and then just get rehired. And there's actually no way of tracking that cop's history or behavior. So
how is that possible, though? How is there no way of tracking it?
Well, there's no national database so if I'm a police officer, I mean, in theory, you'd call the old department and be like, hey, like, you know, like, why is this guy not with you? But there is no database, there's no tracking. And a lot of the time, Jay, like, these complaints, because of union rules, are confidential. And so,
wow.
So Derek Chauvin, the guy who killed George Floyd, had 18 complaints against him. And if you look at that and say, like, shit, that's like a ton of complaints. Like, this guy's a real history. He was like present for the deaths of multiple suspects over time. And these are the kinds of things that, generally speaking, no action is being taken on right now around the country for some of these reasons. So these are some of the policies that people are trying to legislate for, or agitate for new legislation. The defund the police movement is itself, like, should we be investing more in communities of color in particular? 100% yes. Are we overspending on police? Objectively, in my opinion, yes. But the defund the police statement is not helpful, because it literally sounds like you want to zero out like police departments, which is not actually the goal.
Okay, so come with me here. So if you're saying that defunding the police department is not the right direction, you still want to do things in the communities. I've been reading a lot about this act, HR 40. I don't know if you heard about that, where it talks about reparation. And it's been interesting to me, AY, to read up a lot about Germany, who's become one of the most progressive countries there is in the world, by the way. And, when you see signs in Berlin that remind you of the Holocaust and talk about it, and the fact that they've been paying reparation for close to 100 years to the Jewish community. And, it used to seem like such a lofty goal to me, such a lofty thing. And then recognizing that other countries have been doing it. Why is that not something that you think we're not hearing as much about? Is that just because we can't? Is that a topic that people just don't want to? I don't even know why they wouldn't talk about this, because I rarely hear it, and then it loses steam.
HR 40 is a great effort in Congress to try and examine what the heck reparations would look like in practice. And I've read Ta-Nehisi Coates and other people who argue really compellingly that reparations is something that's owed to descendants of slaves in the U.S. And you can't argue with the fact that this country was built on the backs of slaves. So the fact that other countries have done it is awesome. And the fact the United States is not at this point really having a conversation about that is something that I hope will change over time. To me, one of the goals has to be to try to eradicate poverty right now for everyone. And then I think we can look at reparations very seriously. To me, reparations is more possible in a country where people feel like their needs are being met.
Do you think that your strategy currently for the time that we're in would have been beneficial? How would that have worked?
People say to me all the time, Jay, that it's like if all of this shit had hit the fan, like 10 weeks earlier, I'd be the front runner today. I mean, that's something
yes, you would be. Yes, you would be.
That I hear a lot of. It's heartbreaking that we're in this situation with like a crisis on top of a crisis. And certainly I just want to do everything I can to help right now. But I will say that millions of Americans got $1,200 stimulus checks from the government, and they were like, wait a minute, we can do that? And they liked getting the stimulus checks. It helped them breathe easier. It made them less stressed out. And so there are a lot of people joining the Yang Gang all the time, honestly. You look at our mailing list and like supporter base and the rest of it, it's growing all the time because a lot of people are like, wait a minute, like that guy actually made a lot of sense. And a lot of the stuff he described is coming to pass, unfortunately, faster than even I'd imagine.
Man, it's interesting. Even being on air every day. I took about 4 or 5 days off. Obviously, got my family out of town when all the protests started to happen in the riot, and got up here and got settled. But it was interesting. There was such this rush I felt to hurry up and get back on air, and everybody saying, Jay, we want you on air. Your voice is important. And I said, I understand that. But, there's a lot of weight that comes along with the position that I'm in. And I want to thoroughly think through what it is I want to say and what the impact of what I'm going to say is going to have. And I actually want there to be actionable items that when I do go on air, I'm just not pontificating about how frustrated I am or how pissed off I am. I've been that way for a long time. I've been that way since watching my dad deal with cops. And, then you combine that with the pandemic. It's, and it was challenging for me because as a black man, I'm supposed to do that. That is my role. That is my responsibility. And trying to work with people on a day-to-day basis to help me think through what it is I want to say and how I want to say it. Collection of data. I don't know, who do you use for stuff like that, Andrew? Obviously, you can't come up with all this stuff on your own. Obviously, you got your team, but who are some of the people that you talk to that you bounce ideas off of that you think are your trusted, internal circle?
One thing that's fun about being me now, Jay, and this applies to you just as much, is that just about anyone will talk to you. So in your case, if you reach out to Campaign Zero or Police Equity or these black activists who've been trying to figure out, okay, how the heck do we make the police less lethal for people of color? Like the evidence and research and the policies, I just listed to you, they're not mine. They're from Campaign Zero. These black activists, DeRay McKesson and Samuel. I'm gonna mangle Sam's last name, but they're.
It's okay. I'll look it up. Campaign Zero.
Yeah, no, man. I'll send you the links and the info. But it's tremendous because they've done the work, and then I kick the tires on the work they've done and look at it and say, well, one, the data's there. Two, it's common sense. And so that is the fun part of being us, Jay. Is we can equip ourselves pretty quick. Because everyone wants to tell us what they've been working on. And then you and I have the benefit where we can spread that message.
Yeah, I think that's the point, and I try to tell people, we were on air the other day and I was like, hey, look, these next 4.5 months, just go ahead and buckle up, Andrew. Buckle up, brother. It's going to be a ride. It's on the sports side. I can talk about this is that, having the NBA playoffs that are about to happen in that condensed time period, starting in July, ending in October, having MLB that's coming into its own if they're able to get through it. Athletes are going to have the biggest stage they've ever had in their entire lives. And you can bet your tail on it that guys are going to be speaking out. Now, having a commander-in-chief that likes to engage in the sports arena, and I've had this issue at ESPN. It was tough. I mean, look, people are going to talk about Jamel Hill and Michael Smith, two people that got let go by ESPN for speaking out their mind against him. And everybody got put in this really weird situation about, we are for sports, we're not for politics. But then you're like, how do you navigate? He keeps injecting himself into these conversations and using things to politicize and weaponize. And this is going to be a fight. People, fans are about to see a fight for the next 4.5 months on a pretty massive stage. It's going to be crazy to watch.
One thing I know you're outspoken about, which I am 100% with you on, is that college athletes need to get compensated for the revenues and the talents they're bringing in. And to me, there's always been a racial component to this because you have D1 football players and basketball players, often people of color, who are not getting paid. They're getting these scholarships. And then you have these coaches and athletic directors, often commanding 7-figure salaries, often not people of color. And then you have these institutions that are benefiting to the tune of tens of millions of dollars a year, broadcast contracts that are worth hundreds of millions. And to me, there was always like this, it was like an oppression, not just of young people, but also of people of color who are generating the value, risking life and limb, and then being told it's like, hey, you're getting this great education out of it, so just be grateful, shut up. You can't, like, if you took money from anyone, then we're somehow going to take away your eligibility and your ability to play because you have like poked a hole in this bullshit fiction that like you're all amateurs and like we're all amateurs too. Like your coaches are doing it for the love of the game and the like freaking $4 million a year they get paid. So like this to me has always been like the biggest sack of bullshit that you could see in like the institutional frameworks where it's like, wait a minute, like how much did Zion just make for his school or like the broadcast networks, and like how much did he get? I mean, like I imagine Zion was okay, but the thing that worries me really is like that person who's not a household name, who's not going to make the league, who's like there like is going to have a hard time in like their post athletic career after school. Who should have been compensated for the value they were adding when they were in school.
Man, we've been talking about this forever, and I would hear people combat that same, thought that you had with, well, I'm still paying back my student loans. And I would say, I understand the value of education. And I look, that's a whole other different conversation about education, and we can get into that in a little bit. But I'm like, I understand what the issues are around that and how challenging that might be. But I also understand that, I brought in millions of dollars of revenue, and cable companies is just not hundreds of millions. It's billions. I mean, it's billions. It's $10.5 billion in which the NCAA tournament got sold for. And you see guys like Zion Williamson should be getting a residual check every other week, just for the notoriety that he could bring to the table. And so for me personally, and the tonality of it too, AY, it's like predominantly these kids in both these footballs that generate enough money to subsidize all the other sports, they're African American. So then when you're able to say, okay, the university, when there's an issue, you have the athletic director that speaks up about the issue for the university. When the coach has an issue, either the coach can speak out or the coach's agent can speak out. When the league has an issue, the commissioner of the league can speak out. Well, when a player has an issue, who's speaking out on the player's behalf? Nobody. And oftentimes the player doesn't say anything because the player wants to be able to get the leeway to go to another university for a second try and doesn't want to have that university taint his, resume on who he is as a person. So the fact that you have all these individuals that have no representation in the marketplace, but yet it's called amateurism. And people don't even know where amateurism came from. I mean, it came from the 50s with the first director of the NCAA, Walter Byers. There was a player who was running a slant route for a smaller school, got hit running a slant route, catching the ball, and got hit helmet on helmet, passed away. His wife at the time tried to sue the school for workers' comp. They found a loophole around workers' comp because he was not an employee. He was deemed an amateur. So, when you understand where this terminology came from, and then you see how much it's evolved, and the fact that now we're finally on the, verge of getting name, image, and likeness, and how that's a fight is beyond me.
Yeah,
it's
literally.
Fight.
It's like people are like paying for for the video game to be able to play you, like the jerseys, the autographs, and everything else. You can't even have that. Like that to me was the most ridiculous stance. I'm glad that's changing, but that's not where all the money is, really. I mean, the money is hovering around in these broadcast deals.
Well, I mean, what a crazy concept, right? Rev share. I mean, what a crazy concept. I mean, that's what the NBA does. That's what NFL does. That's what MLS does. That's what MLB does. So why is the NCAA any different? I mean, even if you wanted to put that money, Andrew, in escrow, and even if you were to break it down and say, okay, we're going to put a small percentage of this money for the profit that your own athletic department for basketball generates, we're going to, we still have to subsidize other sports. I know a lot of schools are breaking even, but a lot of schools are not, who are way more profitable and in the public eye a ton. So even if we were to give you off a sliver of that, a smaller percentage, and say, let's keep this in escrow. And if you graduate maintaining a certain GPA by this new curriculum that we're going to establish, that's actually going to be conducive to you being successful once you graduate from here, other than you just taking lame courses because basketball is your priority, or your sport is your priority, because you can't major in what you actually want to major in. Even though we're going to call you a student athlete, the reality is you're an athlete student. So, but we can't even come to an agreement on that. Like,
that would be tremendous if you had like an escrow account where people were getting some of the revenue down the road, even. Like you said, like that would be an amazing for so many athletes, and they deserve it. I mean, it was their freaking talent, energy, and dedication that generated the value that right now the schools are all are benefiting from.
Yeah, so I mean, we're on that trajectory. It's going to be even more interesting, because this is already happening on the high school level. With all these different social media platforms, you have kids now who are starting to think about themselves as businesses at a lot earlier of a stage. If you see kids on YouTube who are 10, 11 years old who are making millions of dollars based upon how many views they get and how YouTube is taking that metrics, right?
Yeah, or these top players that are now skipping college. They're just going straight to the G League, and they're like, wait a minute, I can make $250,000 plus maybe some sponsorship and endorsement, can build my brand and the rest of it. Like, they don't need to put up with the NCAA's bullshit anymore. Like, it's not working.
I'm with you, man. And so it's gonna get even more progressive because there's no other choice.
This episode is brought to you by the Jordan Harbinger Show. So Jordan Harbinger is one of those realistic self-improvement guys where if you listen to his show, you actually get things you can apply to your life, as opposed to, oh, that's inspirational. Oh, it makes me feel good. No, it actually is practical information. For example, one of my favorite shows or episodes he's done is with this guy named Justin Ramsdell, who talks about how you can detect and disarm pseudoscience. So you guys all know, you're reading articles and it says, this study says X amount of people do this, and this study says Y amount of people do blah. How do you know it's real? How do you know it's not? This has practical information. How do you detect that? How do you tell if it's fake? And how do you understand where the truth is, which is a challenge in today's media climate. The other episode he has on there recently was with Mark Cuban, our boy, who we just had on here. And I listen to Mark Cuban talk about anything. That guy is fascinating to me.
Check out the Jordan Harbinger Show on jordanharbinger.com/subscribe on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts.
What's next for you? Like, what are some of Andrew Yang's actionable items in the next couple of years? What things would you like to achieve?
I want to achieve so much, Jay, because we're falling apart. And one of the things that this actually ties us back to what you were just saying. we're in like the age of institutional failure. If like you look up and you see an institution, it is not doing very well right now. And our trust in institutions is also collapsing. It's like you rewind a couple generations ago, everyone might have thought like, hey, the NCAA is like A-OK. And then now we're like, what the hell? Like, what are you doing? The police with the killing of George Floyd, our government, the media, you name it. At this point, we're like questioning everything, and with good reason. And if you are an athlete at a college, no one stands up for you, no one represents you. And if you come out and talk about certain things, you're going to be labeled what? A distraction, like not a team player, like a bad apple, you're like not part of the team, and that pressure extends into the corporate realm too. Like for many, many folks who are like, representing different backgrounds in these organizations, it's like, well, it's like you want to be you, but like you don't want to undermine whatever the heck like the corporate picture is. Like if you're a certain firm, and let's say you have major advertisers who throw off like hundreds of millions of dollars. Like when Bill Simmons was like criticizing the NFL, and literally like ESPN and NFL were like hand in glove, and then like it's just like don't bite the hand that feeds you. And so like there's all of this like, oh shit, when like whose hand can I not bite? Like what's going on? But like these things that would have happened behind closed doors a generation ago, now we can all see. Like we can all see glimpses of or clearly because of technology and social media. One thing I said before is that like the illusions are dying. The question is what takes their place? And can we stand the truth when it's shown to us? So for me over the next couple of years, I just want to try and get us through this period, Jay, because it's a disastrous time for so many Americans right now. It's so bad. You're looking at 40 million jobs lost that we know of, at least 40% of which are not going to come back. So you're looking at 16 million jobs gone for good. That's 2 times the Great Recession. We're looking at Depression-era levels of unemployment. And the vast majority of Americans support cash relief right now. And Congress is not passing it. If you look at the $3 trillion or so that's already been spent on stimulus, maybe 10% of it was in the form of cash to people. 90% of it went to bailout, what have you, like the airlines or various big companies, banks, whatever, it's like money's just getting plowed through these pipes. And a lot of it's not reaching people. It's like if you don't have a private banker
we saw that with these small business loans that were supposed to go out towards small businesses that went to a lot bigger small businesses and didn't go to the actual small businesses.
Yeah, and then just ran out. And someone said something. I was talking to Mark Cuban about this, but he said like, why do you even have a limit on this fund? It's like if you literally are just trying to support small businesses, like if a small business qualifies, like just give them the money. Like what's the point of having a pool that gets exhausted by like the Shake Shacks of the world and shit? I mean, nothing against Shake Shack.
Exactly.
I love Shake Shack, but you know what I mean.
I love Shake Shack. I'm with you.
The big company that doesn't need it. And I did not fault the big companies who applied and got the money, because the pot's there for you. You qualify. You've got a banker you can call up. Like you get the money. It's like it's not the big company's fault for taking advantage of a program that's been put out there for them. It's the fault of our government for designing a program really poorly and seeing to it that like the biggest get to feed first.
Man, every time I hear you talk, you just make too much sense. Like you make too much sense. So like, how did you deal with, I'm sure there were some racial things thrown at you throughout the course of your campaign. How'd you deal with that stuff?
I mean,
Did that happen?
There was, but I will say, Jay, when I was out campaigning around the country, I did not get much of that. Like most Americans were very open-minded to me, certainly to my face. Like, I don't know what happened, like, as soon as I leave, but like when I was there was like a real, warmth and openness to many of the gatherings. To the extent that I was frustrated with my treatment, it really was in the media. And I think that like that was tied to my race, honestly. Like that there was like this invisibility that I was like, what the fuck? I'm standing right here. And like it would happen to me frequently enough where I was like, oh, this is certainly not just me imagining shit. And I think a significant amount of it was the fact that I'm Asian American, and like people weren't accustomed to having an Asian person trying to raise their hand and saying like, hey, I've got the solutions, or I think I know where we need to go. So that was a frustration of mine. But it's been invigorating that, this movement has been growing really even after I suspended my campaign. Like I feel like our energy is higher now than it was even like when I was campaigning.
Man, I don't want to inundate you with questions, but it's this is our first time really talking, and sometimes I know what a lot of my friends and I talk about is that, look, I am independent, and Charlemagne is a friend of mine. Karen Kinney, who kind of works with us both, is our light, and we had conversations all the time about the Democratic Party and how they've been able to utilize the black vote in a lot of ways. I think a lot of black people felt let down. Is there a chance for a third party that potentially could be established one day, AY? And maybe is there a way, how would you filter out having better candidates? I'm not saying that our candidates that we have, Joe Biden, is lacking. That's a whole other conversation that I'm not sure we can even get into that. But is that feasible?
So the mechanics of a third party are very, very difficult, Jay. If you look at it, like if someone ran as an independent, I actually talked to Mark Cuban about this because he was looking at a presidential run, and he's a smart guy, a savvy guy, and he dug in and found the same thing I did about the mechanics. Is like running right now as a third party is a great way to help someone else win. It's not going to result in your victory, and that's the reality right now that I think we need to change, because I think the two-party duopoly is destroying us in some ways. I think there are many people who do not feel like either party speaks for them. Right now, people who identify as independents, which I think you may identify as, outnumber either Democrats or Republicans by the numbers. But there isn't a party for you, so you're just like, all right, I guess I'm going to choose one of these two. And so the big reform that would help us advance politically is ranked choice voting, where if you could just say, look, here are a few people I like Yang first, and then Joe second, and then Elizabeth Warren third, or whatever the list is, and then people wouldn't feel like they were forced to vote for a particular person. People wouldn't feel like they were ever going to waste their vote, and then you could have people's true preferences get laid out, and it would make politicians much more responsive and politics much more dynamic, because you'd wind up with like a more parliamentary system where you'd have splinter parties that then had like a degree of support. So if you had ranked choice voting, then you could potentially have more parties. But the way it's set up right now with just this one vote, use it or lose it, or not, it's called like first to the post, like first to 51% is the technical term for our current voting system. It's very, very hard for an independent party right now. And that's just the way our system's set up, which is not deliberate. Like the Constitution has zero language about, there are going to be two political parties. Like, and there were points in the past where there were multiple political parties. Like there were major parties that now don't even exist, like the Whigs. No one even like fucking thinks about the Whigs, but if you like rewound, like that was like a big deal. So that there's a need for dynamism in our political system, but it's unclear where that comes from. And there are a lot of people like you, and maybe Charlemagne and maybe others who are looking up saying like, we need like a better system than this. Like I went through the Democratic nomination process, and like on one level, I really appreciated the fact that, I was included in stuff, and like had in some ways like a fair shot. But there were other times where it was like, man, like this process is really not designed for someone to come in from outside. The fear, Jay, is that DC right now is on a 30-year lag time behind the rest of the country. And we don't have 30 years to wait. And that's just the situation we're in. where if someone like me wanted to try and make changes in the Democratic Party, it would take a significant amount of time. And the question is whether we have that much time.
I mean, yeah, that is the question. So looking at the reality of the situation, I mean, is Joe Biden going to have a black woman with him to be the vice president of the United States? Is that the most suitable? Is that Kamala Harris? Who do you think is the most suitable candidate for that?
If you ask me, is Joe going to have a black woman running mate? I would guess that yes, he will. And then there are several top candidates for that. Kamala, I know, and consider her a friend. I don't know some of the other people that are in the running, but I think that's what you'll see. And I believe that Joe is going to win. I think that Trump is alienating a lot of people that were, like that voted for him and were like, pretty much they were justifying their continued support for him based upon their 401k, stock market, and jobs. They were like, oh, he's doing a great job with the economy. And that argument's not going to work for many, many people this time because, they're just going to look around their town and be like, like the bar is half empty, the rental car agencies like half occupied, it's not a good look for him.
Well, it's interesting because every morning you wake up, you watch a lot of shows, and I watch everything from MSNBC to Fox to I listen to a ton of different networks to try to get alternate opinions so I can come to my own assessment. But it's like, on one end, you hear every morning like this daunting thing, like, unemployment and numbers are astronomical. And then on another, you hear, well, the stock market is up, right? Even though the two don't really correlate. Like, is the stock market being up, is that sustainable? Does that help Donald Trump better because the economy is in that place?
Yeah, I mean, it's marginally helpful for Donald Trump because people at least feel like their stock portfolios are going up. But right now, the problem is that stock prices and unemployment now have no relationship at all. Like, if you fire a lot of people, your stock price probably goes up because they're like, oh, good, you got rid of people. So the issue is whether more people own stock or have jobs, and it's many, many, many more people have jobs than own stock. So like the fact that the employment picture is really bleak is going to impact a lot of people very, very harshly and negatively. And then there's going to be a relatively small percentage of Americans who are just staring at the stock price and their jobs are fine. And, that describes you and me, obviously, but it does not describe the majority of Americans. About half of Americans own no stock, so they don't care about stock market prices. And the top 20% of Americans own 92% of the stock portfolio. So for better or for worse, Jay, the people that you hang out with that own a lot of stock are in the top 20% of the U.S. population, and which is not shocking because like you are who you are, and like you hang out with people who work at ESPN or athletes or whatnot. It's like, I mean, obviously they have like a freaking financial like like team.
I am not there. I am not there. Yeah. I witnessed that from afar. I'm like, oh, you're making how much a year? Interesting. Okay, not there.
Well, so yeah, the stock market prices and jobs are heading in opposite directions, and the jobs are going to hurt more people than the stock market prices are going to help.
So if we're having a balance sheet issue, how come you don't see the government do things like legalize marijuana or legalize gambling in order to capitalize on that tax revenue?
They really should.
Or why is it? Yeah, it just makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that for marijuana, it's like residual cultural issues and probably racism. And it's like, that's the only explanation I can see. Gambling is a different issue. There are some corporate interests in gambling who like the current state of affairs, where they profit from having gambling be legal only in like very expensive licenses.
Yeah. Well,
though I'm for legalizing online poker, that's for sure. Like that makes no sense. Where it's because like then right now you can still gamble. You just have to gamble through some weird offshore site, and that's lost tax revenue. It's less safe for people. It's like not as much transparency around the odds. Like you don't know if they're cheating you. So that one we should do for sure.
Are you a poker player?
I know how to play. I'm not like someone who's sitting there like, making the magic. I have friends who are very high level poker players. Like, I don't know, like Daniel Negreanu. He was like a Yang Gang. Had an event for me in Vegas, which I appreciate. There's I understand it, but a lot of friends who are really into it though. There's like this like overlap, I'm sure, between like sports and bettors and like some.
You should have seen how many times when I was in college, my friends would be like, "You know what the spread is tonight?" I'm like, "What? Stop! No, I don't want to. Why would you tell that to me?" I'm around a lot of degenerates in that way, but they're my boys, so that's what it is.
We interrupt this fantastic podcast to bring you a word from our sponsor, Unagi Scooters. And these things are freaking awesome. So Unagi sends you the scooter in the mail, and it comes in this like Apple iPhone, beautiful packaging box situation. It's sleek. It's easy to assemble, like sets up pretty automatically. It's already charged. And these things can fly. They look good. They feel good. They're a ton of fun. My sister and I have been riding this around our neighborhood during quarantine. And now I've moved back to Manhattan and I'm riding around on the sidewalk and it's a blast.
Get yours at unagiscooters.com. That's UNAGI scooters.com. And if you use the discount code YANG, you get $150 off the Unagi E500. And holy crap, this thing will change your life because it's just so much freaking fun. Like you just feel like you're in the future.
Look like a badass, feel like a badass. It's like a magic carpet. It's awesome.
Well, one of the things I admire so much about you, Jay, is that you were like the highest level athlete in high school, college, number 2 overall pick, and then you went through like a ton of adversity and have now like reinvented yourself, as like a TV personality, commentator, business person, and everything else. And like, I know a lot of former athletes, and it's really, really hard for many athletes to find like that next chapter or like the next set of things that they do. So the fact that you've succeeded at such a high level already and you have like so much ahead of you, you're a tremendous role model.
Well, thank you, man. And I really appreciate you allowing, me to ask you those questions. I feel so much more informed going back into the world. And it's, for me personally, AY, it's like, seeing you on your journey, I find a lot of similarities, right? It's, you going through, and I just want to give credence to you here and for people listening, to do what you're doing, it takes a lot of courage, right? It takes a lot of courage. And I've always felt that when you spoke, it came from a place like, this is how I feel. And I'm sure there are a lot of moments that, due to the lane in which you were running, that you had to think through a lot of different obstacles and challenges about maybe what the system wanted you to do as opposed to what you wanted to do. And I'm sure that was difficult to navigate. But ultimately, man, like you are courageous for stepping yourself out there and, your family and speaking out for what you believe in. And that from somebody who's had to learn how to do that in front of the public, like I had to find out, I think the reason why I am the way I am today is that I had to find out who I was as a human being in front of the camera. And I had to recognize that that is an ongoing process. And sometimes you might get lost in debates or things. And I'm quick to tell people if I was wrong. I'm quick to tell people what I've learned because I want you to enjoy this ride with me because you're on the same journey. You today, it's completely different, I'm sure, than you 2 years ago. And if we're lucky enough to be here, man, we'll be remiss if we didn't pay attention to the things that are happening along the way. So I commend you for that, brother. I really do.
Thank you, Jay. Certainly, it's all about discovering our own humanity, and in our case, we're doing it in front of a lot of people, which is its own process. But we have to humanize this country. We have to humanize our economy. We have to humanize certainly the way police interact with us, and particularly people of color. Like that's really the challenge in front of us. And like you and I have succeeded in a way that like it's elevated you into this like machinery. And so now you like see the machinery and you're like, oh my gosh, like look at all this stuff. And then you're like, how am I going to humanize this? like this is actually quite difficult to humanize. But that is the project of this era. And you're going to be a big part of that. I hope to be a big part of that. But people need us because like we're getting ground up, you know, it's like humanity is losing. And this set of protests to me is like a cry of anguish and grief and anger and passion of humanity. It's like, you know, like one of us was killed in front of our eyes. Like, you know, our leaders are not really listening to us and responding to us. Like we are going to make our voices heard. And I know that's going to be your job and my job in different ways over the days and years to come.
Well, I look forward to our relationship building, man. I really do. And, you know, maybe, once we continue to evolve as a country, when we find ourselves in a little bit better of a place, or hopefully the numbers go down. I know there's been a lot of protests out there. That's also something for people to pay very close attention to, with these spikes in different parts of the country. But if we can pull through, I'd love to meet up with you, man. Get you down to become a Brooklyn Nets fan. We need some more fans in Brooklyn.
What is your relationship to them? Because I literally was like just talking to some of the Nets team. I know you obviously live there, and so you're a fan. You probably are friends with. I know you're friends with KD and some of the other players too. So like, are you like hardcore Brooklyn Nets?
Well, I was a hardcore New Jersey Nets guy.
Yes, that's true.
Meadowlands, yes. Throwback, and it just so happened that they moved to Brooklyn, and my wife and I were in Brooklyn too, so it kind of feels just very close to my heart. It's hard to be a Knicks fan these days.
I divorced the Knicks in 2014, and then there was a period when I was like, you know, looking for a team. And
we scooped you up. We took you on a date and we scooped you up.
Yeah. And then like I gotta admit, the first time there is a little bit like, I mean, I've never been divorced, thank God, in real life. But like the first time I was trying a new team on, it was really freaking weird because like I was used to the Garden. I was used to like the court and the play-by-play and like everything. And so hanging out in Barclays at first, I was like, well, this is cool. Like I get used to this. And like, but it was like, it was hard. But now, you know, I'm a Nets fan and, like been enjoying it. And, you know, it's helped that the team's been good and interesting and, well coached, and well managed. And now I'm actually friends with some of the owners. So like when I come to the game, like I just did, you know,
Joe, Cy, and Claire are great. They're great.
Yeah, they're great, and
they're great.
Like donated, PPE and money. And I don't know if you saw this, Jay, but like remember that All In Challenge thing? It's like I gave away courtside Nets tickets with me. So maybe you'll be there for that too. Maybe we'll do some kind of crazy joint, like
I'll do it with you.
Night.
I'll do it because we have floor seats too. So I'll do it with you. We'll do one game together, and I'll bring somebody else too.
That'll be so much fun.
Done.
So that's a date. That's something for us to look forward to after all of this smoke clears.
Yeah, man. Well, I really appreciate you giving me the time, AY. And I'm glad you've allowed me to give you the nickname AY, too. That's pretty
I love it. Again, man, vastly superior to a lot of the stuff I've been called.
I'm just saying, one day, if you ever get to the White House, my daughter's going to be like, AY. I'm like, that's right. The president has a nickname.
That is right. And your dad gave it to me. All the best to you and the family. And we'll catch up soon in person, man. I'll send you some of the stuff, too, because like I can tell you're into it.
All right, brother. Stay safe. And thank you for all the informative stuff that you've given me, man. I will definitely check out Campaign Zero for sure.
Thanks, Jay. All the best, man.
Take care.